set again in a second. Okay. Hi, everyone. Sorry about that. If you were here for the first couple of minutes of our first live stream, then that was the test and you all passed. Good for you. You did the thing, and that's wonderful. I unfortunately had a little technical difficulty, but I fixed it. So I'm so sorry that happened. Just as a refresher, I'm here with Kolbie Blume. We're going to be talking about her book, Wilderness Watercolor Landscapes, and I had asked her sort of where the inspiration for this book got started, and she gave me not just the answer to that, but also the secret to life. She can only say it once, though. So unfortunately, that's you gotta check the book for it. It's in there. It's hidden. There's a secret message. So Kolbie, again, sorry about the technical difficulties. The story of the background of this book, if you don't mind.
Yes, of course. So, as I was saying before, in order to get to the background of the book, you really have to get to the background of my journey as an artist, because it's kind of an unexpected one. I didn't think I would ever become an artist. Up until about 5 years ago, I thought that my artistic ability maxed out at stick figures. And I just really didn't have any, qualms about that. I was totally fine with doing all the other things that I was doing and letting art be that thing that I would never be good at. And when I first moved to DC about 7-ish years ago, my husband started a program for law school in the evening, and so I had a lot of my evenings free. And it wasn't until then that I kind of started looking at these mesmerizing videos on Instagram of artists doing calligraphy and watercolor painting that I started to wish that I had some artistic ability. And at some point, the I wish turned into, well, why can't I do that? I bet I could try to do that. I'll probably be bad at it, but and so I gave it a try, and I was obsessed, and I practiced so much, and I went through a lot of different phases, and it wasn't until I started to try to paint really, really simple landscapes. One of my most on my Instagram account, the video that kind of blew up my Instagram account is just this really simple landscape watercolor of a night sky scene, and that scene, painting it for me, just brought me back to my childhood. I grew up in Utah. I grew up surrounded by national parks and mountains, and it just something clicked in it for me. And the combination of trying a new medium, of discovering this artistic passion that I had, and rediscovering my love for landscapes and nature and the wilderness was kind of the perfect combination for me. It made me feel just so expansive and alive, and so that's kind of the niche that I fell into. And then that came out tumbling into a book because I figure if I get so much joy from painting landscapes, maybe I can help other people who don't think that they're artistic find joy from painting landscapes too. So,
well, that sounds exciting to me, because I adore sort of at least to me, kind of the stark beauty of like more northern landscapes. As I told you earlier before we started the show, I actually, until about 4 hours ago, was camping up in New Hampshire, and it was like 15 degrees and snowing and cold, and like the leaves were still bright red and gold, and like I'd look at it and go, I just want to like take this and take it with me.
Yeah.
So I think that I completely empathize with looking at the world and going, ooh, how do I capture this? So let me ask you, is there, not asking you to pick your favorite one, because that I think would probably be a little tough, unless you, like, it's not. But is there a favorite kind of landscape? Do you like mountains? Is it forests? Is it lakes? What really speaks to you?
I mean, you're right. It is really hard for me to pick a favorite. I think that I kind of cycle between favorites. Like, I become obsessed with something, and then I'll paint only that for a few months, and then I'll move on to something else. But you named a few of my favorites. I think that my landscape painting started with, vast night sky scenes, which are really just one color and some stars, but then having trees at the bottom of it really makes that sky come alive. And so I spent a lot of time figuring out how I wanted to paint trees. And I would say it's a toss-up between trees and mountains. Those two are some of my very most seem so hard. They seem so complicated. Mm-hmm. And like, there's no possible way that you could ever capture the beauty of something so imperfect and so, I don't know, complex as a mountain or a tree with all of its, little, all of the different details that make them so beautiful. But watercolor really lends itself to that because it's supposed to be imperfect and it's supposed to be just kind of chaotic. And that's why I love painting those so much, because I learned how to kind of let go of the need for control and the need to make everything really perfect, and instead lean into the idea that nature is supposed to be imperfect. Yeah. And it's supposed to be it's supposed to have that inner chaos. That's what makes it so powerful. So anyway.
No, absolutely. I think it's funny. I was up a couple of weeks ago in New Hampshire again with a friend, and we were looking for leaves. And it was this weird moment of like trying to find like the perfect leaf. You didn't want it to be too spotted. It had to like be complete, and you end up just finding, I guess, just finding the leaf that works for you or fits.
Right.
And that makes. I think you're right. There is something kind of natural about that. So you mentioned with painting with watercolor. Let me ask you: Have you? Was that where has there been other types of painting that you've looked at doing? Have you tried other things and you've gone, I don't really enjoy that, or have you experimented with something and gone, that was kind of fun, and like, are there elements from other kinds of painting that you could bring into watercolor, whether it's from a technique or it's a style? If I sound like I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to art, it's mainly because I don't. So if it's a dumb question, that's okay. I'm just curious, though.
It's not a dumb question. So as an artist, I actually started doing calligraphy and hand lettering. So using brush pens and using, calligraphy tools is kind of where I got my start. And then I found watercolor because I was really interested in using watercolor with calligraphy. Mm-hmm. And then that just kind of morphed into watercolor landscapes. But this year actually is the first time I'm kind of maybe looking to expand a little bit more. So I've tried gouache, which is kind of like watercolor in that it's paint that's activated with water, but really it's watercolor that's mixed with some kind of chalky pigment that makes it a bit more opaque. Oh. And I really like gouache. I have tried acrylic. Acrylic is different from watercolor because, obviously, but watercolor, you use water to kind of let the paint do its thing and let it have a life of its own, and you just kind of sit back and watch sometimes. But mediums like acrylic or oils, you kind of you have the reins, right? The paint still might have a mind of its own, and maybe your hand doesn't do exactly what you want it to do, but you do have a little bit more control, which makes it a different kind of challenge and pushes your creativity in a different way. But I have really enjoyed trying to embrace the creative and imperfect elements as I've experimented a little bit more with acrylic and with gouache over the last couple months or so. I'm a little nervous to try oils just because there's a little more materials involved. Like, you don't use oil paints with water, you use oil paints with oil. And also the paintings don't dry very quickly, so usually oil paintings take a long time to finish because they just don't ever dry. So I feel like maybe oil painting is a little bit further down the future while I try to experiment more with gouache and acrylic. But honestly, especially because painting was something that just wasn't even in the realm of possibility 5 years ago, I'm kind of excited about the prospect of really learning to love one medium and then also finding new ways to love a different medium and having more things to discover.
That makes a lot of sense. Again, to me, as someone who is just mystified by art in general, and we've got a question from the live stream, which is good because I have like a very deep art related question that is my favorite to ask people who are very creative. And I basically I don't want to say that it's everyone's least favorite question, but it's a good one. So we'll give it to the live stream first though. So Brandon Bear wants to know, do you have any tips for drawing images that only exist in your mind and don't really have a real world reference? So I'm curious what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, so I think that the tricky thing about painting or drawing something that only exists in your mind is it's really hard to, I mean, obviously you're asking that because it's difficult to translate it onto paper. If you're looking for a way to like find a cheat, if you don't have a reference photo, my best advice is to find maybe a conglomeration of reference photos, like try to find photos that it's not exactly what you want, but try to find photos that hold maybe a piece of what you're trying to paint, and then look at a stream of those photos to try to piece whatever it is you're trying to do, put it all together. But also, I mean, I would say sometimes you just have to do the thing, and it's going to be messy. One of my favorite mantras, especially as I've been delving into watercolor and becoming an artist, is you can't get to your masterpiece unless you make a mess first. And so if you're just going to be like, it's scary. It's really scary to start creating something when you're not exactly sure how it's going to go, and you're definitely going to fail a bunch of times. I have thousands of papers that nobody has ever seen because they went straight into the recycle bin because it wasn't what I was going for. And every artist has that. You can't get to the thing that you're trying to make until you make a whole lot of what it's not first, if that makes sense. So I just think that you have to be willing to be uncomfortable and brave enough to make something that's not quite right and then try again. And the more you do that, the more your brain is going to fire and make more connections and find a way to arrive at the place that you wanted. And honestly, maybe the end result isn't even what you were initially picturing, but maybe it's even better because you're learning along the way and changing what you want. And that's really the magic of creativity, is it's infinite, and it's an infinite path for you to learn and discover more things about yourself. So
no, that's a great answer. And Brandon here has commented, I like that statement, you can't make a masterpiece until you make a mess first. So that I think is applicable in a lot of parts of life. It never occurred to me that as an artist you would also have a waste paper basket full of sheets that no one will see, because I, as a person who occasionally scribbles, have the exact same thing. But that kind of, in a way, leads into my next question, which is like one of my big art questions. And that's about, I don't know if subjective versus objective is the right way to put it, but obviously when you create something, there is an emotion behind it. The painting makes you feel a certain way. If I, as the observer, look at it and feel differently, am I not getting it? Are you, once you created it, is it out in the world and now anyone can interpret it however they want? Is there a correct way for someone to feel about a painting or a piece of artwork, I guess?
Yeah, I love that question. And I am firmly in the camp of, no, I don't think there's a wrong way to enjoy creativity, to enjoy some piece of art. I think that everyone is different. Everybody has different experiences. And this idea of like what it means to the creator versus what it means to the audience or the people who are enjoying the creation after is kind of one line I heard a few weeks ago, very recently, captures the spirit for me, which is the magic of the creation happens while I'm creating it. So for me, the best part isn't like admiring my painting. The best part is making it. So that's the gift for me. That's the thing that makes me grow as a person. That's the part that pushes me into, places that I couldn't have ever gone unless I had the courage to actually create the thing. And then after it's done, after I have finished it and set it free, like whether it's shipping a painting off to its new home, or whether it's, hitting send on an email that has a manuscript I've been working on for months and months, at that point, it's not only for me anymore, it's also for other people. And regardless, if I guess I'm coming at this from the perspective of the author, of the artist. If I put all of my value of what the creation was based on how other people are going to accurately perceive it, it's going to be a real rough ride for me, because no one's going to accurately perceive it, because it was mine, right? Nobody has lived my life. Nobody knows exactly what I'm thinking or feeling when I make it, because they're not me. They're them. So if I, as an artist, the magic happens for me when I'm making it, and it's really freeing for me then to let other people have the freedom to interpret it however they want. And even if their interpretation is negative and critical, and people telling me that I'm doing things wrong, or whatever, I just kind of let that slide. And also I let them have their own opinion and let them have their own thoughts, because my art's not for everyone, and it shouldn't be, because it's not, I'm a person, a nuanced and complicated and flawed person. And the beauty of art is that the more people make it, the more people will find their community, right? I don't have to be for everyone. So that was I kind of answered your question.
Yeah,
but
no. I think that's a great answer. I've never heard it sort of proposed. I've never heard the idea proposed that, no, as the artist, your role is the creation of this, and that's where the joy comes from. And then once it's created, other people enjoy it how they enjoy it. You don't want to end up like, it was Ray Bradbury, who spent, his life arguing with people that, no, Fahrenheit 451 is about television. You're wrong. It's not about censorship. And, that just seems exhausting to have to do that. Instead of just going, that's what it means to you. Cool, man. That's what it means. But you also mentioned sending off a manuscript. So I'm going to bring it back to the book a little bit. So obviously your journey was, you have this Instagram, and it becomes more and more and more popular. People are looking at your work. And what was the process like taking that and creating a book that was designed to teach people? Sort of the mechanical process. Were you approached? Did you approach someone and say, I think this is a cool idea? What was that like?
Yeah, thanks for asking this question. I was approached by a publisher. My publisher, Page Street Publishing, sent me a DM on Instagram and said, the person who reached out to me said that they really loved my videos. They thought that it would make a really great book, and asked if I would be willing to hop on a conference call to talk about the possibility of publishing a book with them. And it's just, really, it's funny that it happened when it did, because I was just getting ready to put together pitches to publishers, because I really wanted to write a book about this very thing. And so it was kind of fortuitous, and I just felt really, really lucky. I remember getting the DM on Instagram and just staring at my phone. And when my husband came home, I couldn't even speak in a complete sentence because I was so excited. It was pretty crazy. And the funny thing is, at the time I was 8 months pregnant, and so we scheduled a conference call at a time when I thought I was going to be still pregnant, but then I went into labor early.
Oh, exciting.
It was exciting and scary. Anyway, that's a whole nother story. But I was still, the point of this is, I was still in the hospital when the conference call with the editor and the publisher was supposed to happen. And I just really didn't want to cancel. And so I took this conference call while I was, postpartum in the hospital and my newborn son. So that's just how it goes sometimes. And maybe I should have just moved it to when I was coming home. But anyway, all good. A lot of good things happening at once.
Yeah. No, you had like a level of commitment to that. You were like, no, like I'm doing this. Now we're doing the call now? Cool. Let me get a towel. I'm good. Okay, let's go. I like that.
Days. It wasn't like immediately after I gave birth, but it was still. It's a story I like to tell people because it's just so ridiculous that I didn't just move it. But
no, I get it. I get it. There's nothing that can kind of compare to like a level of enthusiasm. That's awesome. So then, let me ask you, sort of as a follow-up, what's it like to write a book that is instructional? Obviously, you don't want it to read like a manual. You don't want to go attach socket B to subsection A, and your Yola Flinda couch will be like. You don't want to feel like IKEA. But at the same time, you are trying to help someone learn a skill, which I actually think is even harder than just like how to put this thing together. So what was that part like for you?
That was challenging. It's important to note that my background is not in art, as I said. It is in writing. I majored in literature, and before I was a full-time artist, I was in the communications field in DC out here, so I did a lot of writing, a lot of editing, and so that's kind of where I always thought my career was going to go, which is why I was very interested in writing a book. And it's also important to know that before I wrote the book, I taught watercolor a lot, mostly with videos. And my Instagram account got pretty big because I made a lot of videos. And as I was sitting down to put together all of my knowledge into this manuscript, it just was very apparent that it's so much easier to show someone how to watercolor paint than it is to describe to someone how to watercolor paint. And so it was definitely challenging. I really wanted to make it engaging. I didn't want it to be, like you said, just like a boring manual. So I tried to pepper in bits of my personality and bits of my teaching philosophy, which is embrace your imperfection. It's okay if it doesn't look like you were trying to. It's okay if, you have to take 3 attempts to do this. So I tried to add some encouragement in the actual text, and I tried to make the text as detailed as possible in as succinct a way as I could make it, which was the most challenging thing I think I have ever written too. Because the thing that drives me, that really bothers me when I am reading something instructional, especially when it's so hands-on and visual like watercolor, is when somebody just says, paint a mountain, and they don't have anything else. Especially as a beginner, you're looking at that like, well, if I knew how to do that, I wouldn't have bought this book. Yeah. And so I didn't want to make it overly simple, just because I really wanted even the very beginner to pick up this book and think, okay, I think that I can piece this together. But I didn't want to make it so drawn out that it would be boring. And so I hope that I think that I did an okay job. As a writer, I'm always looking at I flip through my book even now and think, oh man, I could have worded that differently. I think that maybe it would have been better like this. But that's kind of the way it goes with creativity. Sure. And with life. But yeah, so it was challenging, and to sum it all up, but I hope that I did an okay job.
Yeah. I think the step one, paint a mountain, is a great example of some of the frustrations that people can have when they're trying to learn something new. I remember watching Schitt's Creek, which is a hysterical show that I hope everyone has watched. But there's a moment in there where they're trying to cook, and one of the steps is fold in the cheese. And they don't know what that means, because that's a weird, it is a weird thing to try and describe to someone. At a certain point, like, you don't want to say, pick up the knife, get the butter, do this, get the paint, dip it in the thing. But, you know, where you draw that line, I think, is a really, really difficult thing. So you've got your book divided into 7 different sections. Getting started, The Taste of Sky, The Mountains Are Calling, Happy Little Trees, Do You Suppose She's a Wildflower, Still Waters Run Deep, and Painting the Wilderness. Is outside of, I would imagine, Getting Started being the first place to start. If I'm looking at that and I go, I want to paint mountains, the mountains are calling, that sounds like my thing. Can I skip straight to that, or should I really work my way through?
I would recommend working your way through, but I did write all of the projects knowing that many people are not beginning. So, and my editors worked with me a lot to make sure that every project had even the most basic techniques laid out for you, or at least had a reference page for you to go back and say, okay, I don't understand what they're talking about, so let's go back to page 27 to do a refresher on what the wet on dry technique is. And so I tried really hard to make every single project stand alone as much as possible. But to the very beginner who doesn't know anything about watercolor and then decides to flip to the very back of the book, which it's important to note that because I was hoping people would go sequentially, the very beginning chapters are simpler, and then they get more complex as you go along, as you're building your skill and adding more elements to the scenes. If you skip to the very back of the book with 0 watercolor experience, you might be a little frustrated, but I also think you'd be able to get it. I think that you'd be able to piece it together.
I appreciate the vote of confidence. That is bold of you, because you have not seen some of the color choices I have made around the store when it comes to designing signs and going, yeah, put the orange with the blue. That's fine. I actually don't even know if that's good or bad. Those are just the 2 first colors I thought of. All right, so I probably shouldn't skip straight to the mountains. It's only chapter 3. I just got to get through Getting Started, which is where I will probably have my struggle, and then Taste of the Sky, which, you know, I mean, different shades of... Well, no, because the sky doesn't have to be blue; it can be orange also. Okay, I see the problems. I see where I'd make mistakes already. But in talking about painting, you actually have something that we're going to try and do, which I'm really excited about. Mainly because I just get to ask a bunch of questions and watch while someone much more creative than me does the thing that they're good at, which is my favorite way to be involved in artistic endeavor.
Yes. So as part of this interview, I was so excited because I'm going to do a little demonstration. This is one of the projects from the book. I don't know if I think the lighting's okay.
It looks great, yeah.
Okay, this project is called Cotton Candy Sky. Because it's this beautiful sunset sky with all of the different colors and the sun shining through, and it might look really complicated, but actually this is in the first, so it's in chapter 2. It's the 5th project in chapter 2, and it's way easier than it looks. So I'm going to show you how to do it right now.
Awesome.
So first, I'm just going to grab my watercolor paper. I'm using what's called a watercolor block, which means that it has a bunch of watercolor paper glued together on all 4 sides, and that is just so the paper doesn't warp too much. The thing about painting with watercolor is anytime you paint on paper, it's gonna warp a little bit. That's why traditionally with watercolor, artists do what is called stretching their paper, and stretching your paper involves submerging it in water completely and then taking it out and taping the paper to a board and letting it dry completely after it's already been submerged, and then painting on it, and that's supposed to make it so it doesn't warp. But as you can imagine, that process is very arduous and I don't have the patience for it. And because I didn't go to art school and I'm not like a, traditional watercolorist, I don't feel like I have to follow all the rules. So I really like watercolor blocks because they let me paint right on the block with the sheet of paper, and it keeps the warping to a minimum in a really easy, efficient way. So in case you ever wanted to know about why watercolor blocks are nice and even what they are, so let's just get started. I am picking up a pretty big brush. This is a round brush. It's a size 14, but you don't have to use this size.
Okay.
I'm picking up a big brush, and then with clean water, let me see if I can hold this up to you. With clean water, I'm just going to get my whole paper wet.
Okay.
So you can paint all the way to the sides, or sometimes I just like to leave some of the sides a little jagged with the water, but we're going to get the whole paper wet.
This might sound like a really dumb question. Does it
Yes.
matter if the water is warm, cold? Is there anything I have to worry about there? I just go, got water, I know it's clean, I'm good.
Yep, it doesn't matter if it's warm or cold, at least to my knowledge.
Okay,
So,
cool.
yes, not a dumb question. There's no such thing as dumb questions when you've never done art. That's my kind of rule when I am teaching people how to do this. So, as long as it's clean, and as long as you don't use too much. So I'm just putting like a thin sheen of water, and notice how I'm holding it upright and it's not dripping off of the paper. If you have water that's dripping off of it, you might have a little too much. And if that's the case, just pick up a towel or a paper towel and mop up a little bit. Either way, you want this layer of water to be pretty thin. Otherwise, the paint is not going to do, it's not going to adhere to the paper. It's just going to like sit in a puddle on your paper. So now that I have the water down, I'm going to paint the sky. That's going to be my first layer. And notice how this is a reflection. So like the sky is on top, and then the sky is reflected along the bottom, right? And so I'm going to try to, in my mind, separate my paper into two halves, and as best I can, make that reflection in one layer. It's important to note that in the book, you don't have to do all of this in one layer, but you can do a little bit of each color and let it dry. But for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to do it all in one layer.
Okay.
So the reason that I got it wet is because I want the watercolor to blend really well. I want it to blend in with the different colors, so I'm starting with yellow, and instead of starting right in the middle, I'm leaving the middle a little bit white, some white space, because that is going to indicate where the sun is. The tricky thing about art that I learned is if you want something to be really bright, as like a light or the sun, you actually don't add more color, you add less. You want that thing to be white. So I'm adding a ring of yellow around where I imagine the sun is going to be. Just a little bit more. This is, normally I would be painting not straight up, but we're having a lot of fun with streaming and doing live demonstrations this way. So I have some yellow, and then I'm going to add some orange. But instead of doing it in it looks red, but it's more like red-orange. Instead of doing it in a ring, I'm just going to kind of paint wings off to the side. And notice how, because the paint is wet, because the paper is wet, the paint kind of blooms around. And this is a other benefit of a block. I can move the paint, my block around, and let it just kind of move on its own and blend colors. So I have some yellow, I have some orange. Now I'm going to take a little bit of purple and just kind of spread it around wherever it's going to go, along the bottom. And at this point, I'm going to wash off my brush.
Okay. And
with clean water, just between some of the colors, I'm going to dab with the clean water and kind of encourage the colors to blend even more.
Okay.
And what that will do is allow the paint to move, and will allow the white of the paper to shine through a little bit more. The cool thing about watercolor that makes it so different and unique, I think, especially from like oils or acrylic, is its transparency. And when you utilize watercolor's transparency to allow like pockets of white space to show up, that's called luminosity. So you're allowing the watercolor to create this really luminous texture where it looks like it's glowing because the white of the paper is showing through the pigment. And it's really useful for painting skies, especially. So now that we have some of the purple, I'm just going to finish with a little bit of the blue, just along the bottom here. And as you're painting this is one of the things that I mentioned in the books, particularly with this project, because it is in the first painting chapter. If your sky just kind of looks like a blendy mess of colors, that's okay. It should look like that.
Okay.
So one way to encourage the colors to blend even more together is to, like I said, get a clean brush with clean water and just kind of like tap the colors together and adding more water on there. So it allows the colors to just kind of blend. And then you can also go back and add more colors, because as you add water, it might dilute some of the colors that were already on there. So like this yellow got a little diluted, so I'm just going to add a little bit more. And then maybe I'm going to add a little bit more of this orange just to make it a little brighter. If as you're doing blended things, it feels like your colors are getting muted or washed out, another thing you can do is let this layer dry, and then once it's dry, do it all over again. So re-wet your paper, and then just do another layer doing the exact same thing. So at this point, this is where, well, up here, this is just a little brighter than I was intending, so I'm just going to mute it out a little bit. At this point, this is where I'm going to stop and let this dry. Luckily, we don't have time to let that dry all on its own, but I have prepared another painting. So this is what it might look like after all of that has dried. And then in order to paint the trees, because that's the last step, is to paint this line of trees. It would take me a long time to, not a long time, but like a while to paint all of these trees along, but I am going to show you my trick for painting like a reflection of trees. So when you have the sky, to create a silhouette, you just need a darker color. Oftentimes, you might think you would go for black, but actually, I think, and this is something I've learned, this is something you're supposed to learn in art school, but I didn't learn until I started doing art regularly. Black as a pigment washes out your color a lot, and it might make things look a little muddy. So it like darkens the overall tone. And so instead of using black, sometimes I will use a dark blue, and often that dark blue is called Payne's Gray, if you are ever looking at just little tidbits of information I have here. I'm going to stand up and do this next part. So in order to get the line of trees, what we're going to do is take our paintbrush and paint a line through the middle of the paper. It doesn't matter if this line is blotchy or, I'm going to move my light so you can see it a little bit better. We're going to paint over this line, so it doesn't really matter what it looks like because it's just acting as a reference, right? And then paint your line of trees. You could do it one side at a time, so like paint trees on one side and then turn it over and paint trees on the other side. But one way that I like to do it is to paint just the trunks, and paint the trunks both sides at once, so that you know you have the sizing that you want, because it's kind of tricky in order to get the reflection to match, doing it one at a time. So as you're painting the trunks, just make sure to remember that nature is imperfect, but your brain will want to make all of the things that you're painting match, because your brain just really loves that symmetry. Mm-hmm. So you might have to intentionally make your trees different sizes, space them out differently, so it doesn't look quite so symmetrical, because actually when you embrace that kind of asymmetry, it looks more realistic. It looks more like it's in nature. Okay. So you would go all the way across just like that. I'm going to kind of skip a step for the sake of you not, watching me monotonously paint a lot of trees.
Honestly, it's really very zen. It's very like with the world being so intense right now, it's very calming.
Well, good. I'm glad. I'm really happy about that. But now I'm going to show you how to actually paint the trees, because this is one of those times where you might think to yourself, okay, cool, I can draw a trunk. And then you get to the pine needles part, and it's like, oh, well, good thing I don't know how my hand works anymore. So what I do is I do loose watercolor landscapes, meaning that I don't make them perfect. So I like to call this technique the blobby technique, meaning I draw a trunk, and then a little bit below the tip of the trunk, I just kind of draw blobs on either side that might kind of wisp out like that, but I'm using a small paintbrush.
Okay.
And I'm just kind of painting these blobs in the general shape of a pine tree and going all the way down. And if your blobs look a mess, that's okay. Trees often look a mess. I don't know if you've ever looked at trees like in real life, not at, Christmas tree farms or whatever, but most trees are super gnarled and they don't look perfect, and they're often leaning and crooked. And so if your trees, look like that, good job. You have made realistic trees. So that's just kind of how I make these trees. And then once I've done one side, just flip it over and do the same thing on the other side. When I teach people how to paint trees, it's funny that you say that Zen thing, because when I teach people how to paint trees, they most often are really apprehensive to start, because it feels like, oh, I'm never going to get this right. But then once they try and put their paintbrush to paper, it's a little messy, but they get really into it. Several times I've had students say, man, I could just do this for hours to some good music and just kind of like let the world go away. And that's what I love so much about painting. It kind of goes back to what I said about, for the artist, the good part isn't admiring your art. The good part is making it. And that watercolor is what taught me that. Because before I was an artist, I was a major perfectionist. I was really hard on myself all the time. It's a hard habit to break. I still probably am. But I had a hard time letting go, especially when things didn't go my way. And watercolor taught me that art, and honestly life, isn't about the results that you produce. It isn't about, like showing your work to everybody and saying, look at what a good job I'm doing. Now everybody praise me. Life and art are both about enjoying where you are and finding the ways that you can be who you want to be in the moment, and finding joy in the process. And that is really the key that I have found to living life on my terms and with purpose, doing things for the process instead of for the product. So anyway,
Wow.
This would take probably another half hour to do all the rest of the trees, so I'm probably going to stop there. But if you do all the rest of the trees in that way, then you will arrive at this. And notice how all of these trees are, not all of them line up exactly, not all of them are really pretty. It's not an exact reflection, but man, it was so fun to make. Yeah. And that's exactly why I wrote this book, so that you can understand that painting landscapes isn't about, putting together a perfectly curated piece of art. And it's not about putting everything together all at once. It's about breaking things down into bite-sized pieces. So we didn't paint all of this all at once, right? Mm-hmm. It was one color at a time, and one layer at a time, and one tree at a time. And being in the moment and really enjoying the process and how it makes you feel and how it makes you feel alive. So, I hope you enjoyed that demonstration. It's always so fun.
I love that. That was great. Like I said, I am not terribly talented when it comes to painting or drawing or creating. And so watching something that, to me, and my very, very uneducated eye goes, I think I could do that. That seems like a thing I could do. That was really wonderful. And then, like I said, it was just very zen to watch the trees kind of come out. And that was really fun. That was a lot of fun. And thank you so much for doing that. Yeah.
Yes.
So if I can, I'm gonna end it with one. I guess I don't want to say one last question that feels so final. One question though, which is when it comes to the stuff that you've created, when it comes to the stuff you've learned. What would be the biggest overall lesson that you've learned? It could be a technique. It could be a thing like taking your time. It could be whatever you've learned from this process. And then what's something new that you're excited to potentially try?
Okay, I love those questions. So the thing that I've learned from creating, from writing the book, from becoming an artist when I didn't expect to, from creating things in general, is I actually don't want it to be perfect. And this is an idea that kind of came to me a few months ago, and I just can't stop thinking about it. Because as I said before, I definitely thought of myself for most of my life as a perfectionist, and I actually had a lot of pride in that title, because to me, perfectionism meant that I was committed to, excellence, and that I was not going to settle for anything less than great, and that I took pride in my work and didn't want to produce poor quality things. But the more that I created and kind of embraced creativity, the more my perfectionism didn't encourage me to create. In fact, my perfectionism encouraged me not to create, because if I can never be perfect, then what's the point, is what perfectionism was telling me. Mm-hmm. And when I realized that badge of perfectionism was preventing me from experiencing such a mind-blowing and relaxing and almost magical thing, which is painting with watercolor, I didn't want that anymore. And I also kind of pieced together the thing that I've learned about creativity is that it's based on, creativity happens when you create things, right? Creativity is the process of creating something. And if you're creating something, that means there always has to be a well of things for you to draw from in order to create, right? Like, creativity doesn't stop. Creativity is endless. And because creativity is about the process, you don't want it to stop, because the act of creativity is the thing that makes it so magical. The act of being in that process is what makes in my mind, is what elevates humanity to this like otherworldly thing. And it's just really amazing to be part of. But perfection, the idea of perfection implies that there's some kind of stopping point, right? If perfect exists, that means there's some kind of metric that where you can stop, where you're done, where you don't have to keep going anymore because you've reached perfection.
Sure.
And so I think that those two things don't mix. And as a creative, that's the kind of thing I want to tell people, and especially beginners, is I know that your perfectionism or your fear of failure or whatever is telling you that you shouldn't even start because it is going to be bad. But actually, the magic isn't in whether or not you've created a good or a bad thing. The magic is about the act of creating. And so whether it's perfect or not is completely irrelevant. And it's the imperfections are often what lead to the best discoveries. So that was kind of like really deep, but this is the kind of stuff I think about all. I'm glad because it's so meaningful for me, and that's part of why I wrote this book, and it's part of why I do what I do, and I'm so frontward facing with it, with my Instagram account, and wanting to get out there and tell people, because it was just really life-changing for me. I don't remember the second part of the question that you asked.
So the second part was, what's something that you're excited about doing that's new? What's a new thing you want to tackle or work on or become imperfectly perfect at, or perfectly imperfect? I think that actually works probably better.
Yes. Okay. I love that question too. I would love to delve into different paint mediums, which is what we kind of talked about earlier. I would love to, at one point, have the courage to try to master oil painting. One thing I've really been wanting to do a lot with my creativity is figure out a way to showcase like the act of creating and blend it with a lot of other things that are important to me, like this idea of rejecting perfectionism, and the fact that I'm a writer. I would love to figure out a way to combine words and the ideas that I have with the art that I'm doing. And one way that I've thought about doing that is with video. And so TikTok is actually a really good platform for that, because it's just these little bite-sized videos where I can also overlay words and things that I'm thinking about on top of it. And so if I can put all of my ideas and visuals together in one really cool package, that's something that I would love to continue exploring as a content creator and as an artist and as an author. So that's something I'm excited about right now.
Awesome. We have a comment in our live stream from Christina Giles, who earlier was talking about how I'm not wrong, blue and orange are complementary colors, so that felt pretty good. And also talking about their experiences with lighting design, saying interpretation of the creative piece. I've had that happen with my lighting designs, and they're saying that you should try oil sticks. One of my artist friends uses them as an easier way to do oil paintings, especially on the go. I don't know what an oil stick is, but there you go. So, what an oil stick.
Pretty good advice. I'll have to check those out.
Yeah.
I think that any time that you can give a beginner like me with oils baby steps to get into the medium, it makes it a little less scary. So I really appreciate that tip.
Yeah. Well, that I think is going to bring us to a close, and what a good place to end it on. I think weirdly is kind of coming full circle with learning and experiencing and perfect imperfection. I think I kind of really dig that as a theme, and not to. Ruin's not the right word, but not to sort of put a pall on that. However, I do have to make a very quick shameless plug. You can find this book and many other books at Town Book Center, which is in Collegeville, Pennsylvania. So if you're local and you don't know us, come check us out. We are allowing browsing inside the store. We have a whole way to keep everybody safe. You have to wear a mask and keep your mask on. But we would love to see you. And if you're not local and you go, I really want that book, and I like the supporting a local bookstore, and that Drew guy was okay. You can also support us by going online to townbc.com. That's TOW. N as in Nike, E as in Echo, B as in Bravo, C as in Charlie.com, and you can order the book there. Again, the name of the book is Wilderness Watercolors Landscapes. And, I'll be honest, I'm going to try. I do not think it's going to work. Well, let me rephrase that. I'm going to try and paint. I think that they will be better than if I hadn't tried, so that's something. But I'm excited to give it a shot. So again, Kolbie, thank you so much for being on with me tonight. This was a lot of fun for me.
Oh, it was such a pleasure for me too, Drew. Thank you so much for hosting, and I just had a lot of fun too.
Thank you. And for everyone tuning in, thanks for coming and checking us out. And I'm super sorry about the technical difficulties in the first part of the show. But it's like the 15th one, and it's the first time we've had that happen, technically. So thank you so much, and everyone have a wonderful day. Stay safe, and if you are local to Pennsylvania and you try and come to the store tomorrow, we're actually closed for Election Day, so go out and vote. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.